I wasn't trying to find anything that day, and if I'm being honest, I think that's exactly why what happened felt so overwhelming. My life at that point was quiet, predictable, and in many ways comfortable. I had a husband I trusted, a daughter I loved more than anything, and a routine that felt stable enough to lean on without questioning it too much. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind where the sky stays gray for hours and the house feels unusually still. My husband, Daniel, had taken our 6-year-old daughter Lily to visit his mother, and I decided to stay home so I could finally deal with something we had been putting off for years, the hallway closet. It had slowly turned into a place where we stored things we didn't want to think about, and that day I told myself I would clean it properly. I made myself a cup of coffee, rolled up my sleeves, and started pulling things out one by one. Old coats, boxes of shoes, random household items we hadn't used in years. It was simple, almost mindless work, and for a while my thoughts drifted in that calm, empty way that comes with routine tasks. Then I found the box. It was pushed all the way to the back, hidden behind a stack of old photo albums. At first glance, it looked ordinary, just a small cardboard box sealed with tape that had started to yellow with age. But something about it immediately felt out of place. I didn't recognize it, and that bothered me more than I expected. I've always been the kind of person who knows what's in my home. I remember what we buy, what we keep, and even what we forget about. But that box didn't connect to any memory I had, and that alone made me pause. I sat down on the floor and pulled it closer, telling myself it was probably nothing important, maybe something Daniel had kept from before we got married. Still, there was a strange feeling in my chest as I reached for the tape and slowly peeled it back. Inside, there were a few scattered items that didn't seem to belong together. Some old documents, a worn leather wallet, and a single envelope resting on top. The envelope immediately caught my attention because it had Daniel's name written on it in neat, careful handwriting that I didn't recognize. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't his. For a moment, I hesitated. I actually considered putting everything back exactly as I found it, closing the box and pretending I had never seen it. But curiosity doesn't really give you that option once it takes hold, and before I could stop myself, I opened the envelope. The letter inside was handwritten, and there was something about the way it was written that made it feel serious from the very first line. It began simply, but the tone was heavy. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means I finally found the courage to leave this behind. I know you'll be angry, maybe even hate me, but you deserve to know the truth. I felt a slight tension in my chest as I continued reading, not fully understanding why yet. You've been living a life built on a lie, and I've been part of that lie since the beginning. At that point, my focus sharpened completely. Whatever this was, it wasn't something small or unimportant. And then I reached the line that made everything else disappear. The truth is, she's not your daughter. For a moment, the words didn't fully register. I read the sentence again, slower this time, hoping I had misunderstood it. But the meaning stayed exactly the same, clear and impossible to ignore. She's not your daughter. My first reaction was to reject it entirely. It didn't make sense. Lily was our daughter. Everyone said she looked like Daniel, and I had never questioned it for a second. But the letter didn't feel like a joke or some kind of misunderstanding. It felt deliberate, like a confession that had been written with care and regret. I kept reading, even though part of me wanted to stop. I should have told you the night it happened. I almost did, but I was afraid of losing you and destroying everything we had built. My hands started to tremble slightly as I held the paper. It was one mistake, one night, and I've lived with it every day since. The writing became less steady there, as if the person had struggled to keep their composure. At the end, there was no name, no signature, just a final line that felt heavier than everything else. I'm sorry for the truth you were never meant to find. I sat there on the floor for a long time after I finished reading. trying to make sense of what I had just seen. My thoughts kept circling around the same question, but no matter how many times I tried to approach it logically, nothing fit in a way that felt safe or reassuring. Maybe the letter wasn't about us. Maybe it was something from Daniel's past, something that had nothing to do with me or our daughter. That was the explanation I wanted to believe, and for a while I held on to it as tightly as I could. But there was another possibility, one that I didn't want to consider, and the more I tried to ignore it, the more present it became. What if the letter was about us? By the time Daniel and Lily came home that evening, I had already put everything back exactly where I found it. The box was sealed again, hidden in the same place as if it had never been opened. But I kept the letter. I slipped it into my sweater pocket, feeling its presence there like a quiet weight I couldn't ignore. Lily ran into the house first, full of energy, talking about her day before I even had a chance to say hello. I hugged her, holding her just a little longer than usual, noticing small details I had never questioned before. Daniel came in right after, calm and relaxed, completely unaware that anything had changed. He kissed my cheek and asked if everything was okay, and I told him I was just tired from cleaning. He laughed and said he had been meaning to deal with that closet for a while, and something about how easily he said it made me uneasy. That thought stayed with me through the entire evening. Through dinner, through Lily's bedtime routine, through the quiet moments when Daniel scrolled on his phone like everything was completely normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. Later that night, when the house was quiet and Lily was asleep, I realized I couldn't keep the letter to myself any longer. I called Daniel into the living room and told him I had found something in the closet. At first, he didn't seem concerned, but the moment I showed him the envelope, I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. It was brief, but it was there. He took the letter from me slowly, and after a short pause, he admitted that he had seen it before. The words hit me harder than I expected. He told me he had found it a long time ago and didn't know what to do with it. He said he had read it more times than he could count, trying to decide whether it meant anything or not. When I asked him why he hadn't told me, he hesitated before answering, and that hesitation changed something between us. He said he wasn't sure he wanted to know the truth. I stared at him, trying to understand what that meant, and the longer the silence stretched between us, the more I felt like I was standing at the edge of something I couldn't step away from. Because whatever that letter meant, and whatever he had been hiding, it was about to change everything. For a while after Daniel said that, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't calm or comfortable, it felt heavy, like something was pressing down on the room, making it harder to breathe. I could see that he was thinking carefully about what to say next, but I wasn't sure I wanted careful words anymore. I wanted something honest, something clear enough to hold on to. I asked him what he meant, and he told me that when he first found the letter, he convinced himself it might not be real, or at least not relevant to us. He said that if it was a lie or some kind of misunderstanding, bringing it up would only create damage that couldn't be undone. But as time passed, the doubt never really went away, and instead of facing it, he chose to live around it. That answer didn't comfort me. If anything, it made things worse, because it meant he had been carrying that doubt quietly for years, letting it exist between us without ever giving me a chance to respond to it. I asked him directly if he thought the letter was about me, and he didn't answer right away. That pause was enough to tell me what I needed to know. He said he didn't have proof, but the wording of the letter made it hard to ignore the possibility. He talked about one mistake, one night, and how it didn't leave many other explanations. Hearing that forced me to look back at my own memories in a way I never had before. I tried to find something, anything that could explain what the letter was describing, but everything felt distant and uncertain. There was one memory that stood out, Something small that I had never paid attention to at the time, a night years ago when I had too much to drink at a work event and didn't remember everything clearly. For the first time, I couldn't completely dismiss the possibility that something had happened that I didn't fully understand. That realization alone was enough to shake me, but what came next was worse. When I asked Daniel why he never did anything to confirm the truth, he hesitated again, and then he told me that he had already done it. He said that when Lily was about 2 years old, he arranged for a DNA test without telling me. I remember feeling like the ground shifted under me when he said that. Then I asked him what the result was, even though part of me didn't want to hear it, and he told me that the test came back negative. He said he repeated it with a different lab just to be sure, and the result was the same. Lily was not his biological daughter. For a moment, everything went completely quiet in my mind. I couldn't connect the result with the reality I had been living in for years. It felt like the two things simply couldn't exist at the same time, but they did. I tried to tell myself that there had to be a mistake, that something about the test must have been wrong, but the certainty in his voice made that explanation feel weaker with every second. Then I asked him the question that mattered most to me in that moment. I asked him why he stayed. He looked toward Lily's room before answering, and when he spoke, his voice was steady in a way that made it impossible to misunderstand him. He said that she was his daughter, regardless of what any test said. He talked about being there from the beginning, about all the moments they had shared, and how none of that could be erased by a piece of paper. That answer was the only thing that felt solid in the middle of everything else falling apart. But it didn't answer everything, because if he stayed for her, that didn't explain what he felt about me. When I asked him that, he didn't avoid the question, but he didn't answer it immediately either. He admitted that it had been harder to know what to do with his feelings toward me, because the doubt changed something fundamental, something that trust depends on. We stood there for a long time after that, both of us trying to process the same truth from different sides. And then he told me there was something else. At that point, I didn't think anything could surprise me anymore, but I was wrong. He said that after getting the test results, he started looking deeper into the letter itself. He wanted to know who wrote it and why, so he compared the handwriting to anything he could find. He said it took time, but eventually he found a match. When he told me whose handwriting it was, I felt a completely different kind of shock. It wasn't mine. It was his mother's. At first, I didn't understand what that meant. It didn't make sense that she would write something like that, especially something so serious and personal. But then he explained what he had discovered while trying to understand her involvement. He told me that the hospital where Lily was born had reported an incident that same year. It wasn't widely known, and it hadn't been publicized in a way that reached most people, but there had been a confirmed case of 2 newborns being switched shortly after birth. When he said that, everything seemed to shift again, this time in a way that reframed everything we thought we knew. He explained that his mother had somehow found out about the incident, possibly through someone she knew at the hospital, and instead of telling us, she chose to keep it to herself. The letter wasn't written to confess an affair. It was written because she knew the truth about what had happened and didn't have the courage to say it out loud. Lily was not biologically ours, but not because of betrayal, because she had been placed in our arms by mistake. That realization was overwhelming in a completely different way. It didn't erase the pain or the confusion, but it changed the shape of it. All the years of doubt, all the silence, all the questions we had quietly lived with, they had been built on an incomplete understanding of the truth. I remember sitting down because I couldn't stay standing anymore, trying to absorb what that meant for us, for Lily, for everything. Daniel came closer and said something that I still think about even now. He said that no matter how we got here, no matter what the truth turned out to be, she was still our daughter in every way that mattered. And as I looked at him, I realized that despite everything we had just uncovered, that was the one thing that hadn't changed. The truth didn't take her away from us, but it did change how we understood everything else. And sometimes, the hardest part isn't losing what you thought you had. It's realizing that the truth was there all along, quietly waiting for the moment when you were finally forced to see it.